My name is Jonathan.e.Vanarneman, and I am from the beautiful island of St. Martin. I am currently doing my master's in dance movement therapy and counseling, and I also work as a therapist and a mental health practitioner. So today I'm here to speak to you about mental health. And I thought that the best way to do so was to take you through 3 concepts. So, concept number 1, what is mental health? To be mentally healthy means that your mind responds appropriately to a given stimuli. Let's look at 2 examples. First, let's take Susie. Susie studied really hard for a test and she got a good grade, so she was really happy. Then she went home and she found out that her goldfish died, so she got sad. Then the next day, she found out that she was going on a cruise with her family, so she got really excited. And then she found out the guy she had a crush on was dating somebody else, so she was heartbroken. Example number 2. Let's look at George. George studied really hard for the test as well, and actually did better than Susie. But when he got his grade back, he immediately started thinking about the next test for the next class, and soon forgot about the good grade he'd just received. When he got home that day, his mom sat him down and let him know that his aunt had passed away. George was speechless and he didn't know what to do, so he decided to focus all his energy on studying for the test at the end of the week. He ended up acing the test and the teacher congratulated him on achieving the highest score. He thanked her, and then when he got home, he spent the entire weekend scrolling on TikTok. Susie failed the test because she was too heartbroken to study. So, which of these students is more mentally healthy? Is it Susie or George? With Susie, it is clear that she is able to easily access her emotions and respond accordingly. When something good happens, she's happy. When something sad happens, she's sad. She's clearly processing all of her emotions in real time, and she does not get hung up on one or the other. However, her ability to be in touch with her emotions prevents her from taking care of her responsibilities, and she ends up failing a test. With George, his emotions take a back seat and he is able to complete all of his responsibilities. However, he is unable to access his emotions. He does not feel joy when something good happens and he does not grieve his losses. Although George might later be able to achieve what looks like success, it is clear that he is not in a good mental space and this form of living is not sustainable. George is actually more susceptible to suicidal ideation and self-harm. Susie, on the other hand, is mentally responsive, and although it might seem like she's all over the place right now, over time she'll learn a lot about her emotions and her body, and she will be able to care for herself in a way that allows her to both feel and take care of her responsibilities. The second concept that I wanted to speak to you about was the emotional cycle. So I wanted to use an example. Let's say that this is a stimuli, this is you, and this is expression. An emotion, you can think of an emotion as having to go through the entire cycle in order for it to be expressed. So if we take the example of Susie, Susie, she got a good grade. That was the stimuli. After she got the good grade, she felt really happy and she expressed this by smiling. She also went home and she found out that her goldfish died. She got really sad and then she expressed this by crying. Then Susie found out that her family was going on a cruise and she got really excited and she expressed that by screaming and jumping up and down. And then finally, Susie found out that the guy that she was dating, that she had a crush on, was dating somebody else, and she was heartbroken and she expressed that by crying again. And so in this example, we see that every time that Susie had a stimuli, the emotions cycle through her body and she was able to express it, right? So If you look at Susie, the emotions are no longer in Susie's body. Now we'll look at George. With George got a good grade. That was the stimuli. And George had no response. Then George's aunt died. And he didn't know what to do. And so he ignored his emotions and he chose to study instead. So there was no expression of that grief. And then George got another good grade. And he was not happy again. And so with George, we see that even though he's getting different stimuli, the emotions are getting stuck in his body and they're not being expressed. And so what will happen after a while of George not expressing any of his emotions, once it gets to the top, it's not going to have anywhere left to go. George will have reached his capacity and George is going to have a mental breakdown. And that is exactly what we do not want. So, something that we did not talk about was how did Susie become Susie and how did George become George? What if I were to tell you that George used to be just like Susie, but when George was 7, his dad died, and that grief was so much, and that absence was so heavy that George didn't know what to do and he didn't know how to handle it, and so he just retreated into himself and he became the way that he is. And I think that's really important because we can all become George at any moment, especially if our glass is already half full. How many Georges do we know in our society? How many Susies do we know in our society? And in what ways do we reward the Georges and punish the Susies? I think that's a really valid question to ask in Caribbean societies that have success looking a very specific way and not paying attention to the broader picture of what that success takes. The good news is that George, after he graduated, he went to a writing workshop, and the workshop asked him to write a letter to someone who had passed. And through this exercise, he wrote a letter to his father and he wrote a letter to his aunt. And through the process of writing, before he was done, he just broke down in tears. And he started to sob and sob and sob and release and release and release. And then he went back to the writing class the next day and there was another prompt, and then he sobbed again. And then he went back the next day and there was another prompt and he sobbed again. And through this process of writing out things that he had pushed down for so long, he was really able to connect to those emotions and release them, even though he'd been harboring them for such a long time. And so now George is okay. George is doing okay. He and Susie are actually friends, and they send their hellos. And so I hope that if you saw yourself in George or you saw yourself in Susie, you have a better idea of what you should do now. And I hope that you learn something about mental health in the process.